Greetings, traveler of the leaves. Tonight, I'll be your guide on a path that isn't walked with feet, but with the heart. What I'm about to tell you isn't written in the scrolls of the hidden leaf, nor in the elders' archives. It's a story whispered by the wind, held in the silence of those who wait. They speak of a name, Madara Uchiha, the ghost of legends, the dreamer who forgot how to wake. I see you've arrived with your eyes lowered, like someone who's run too far or lost too much. Maybe you're tired, maybe searching for something you no longer remember by name. So come, sit here with me beneath this old tree where the leaves don't fall. They remember the ground is soft, the wind is gentle, and for now, the world can wait. Let the words drift slowly like a quiet rain. Here, everything moves with care. Nothing needs to be conquered, only felt, only remembered. Ready? Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let my voice carry you back to before the pain, to within himself. In the quiet hours, when the world forgets to judge, Madara sits alone by a river that has no name. The water moves like time itself, patient, endless, carrying away what was never meant to stay. His hands rest on his knees, and for once, they're not forming seals. They're just hands, tired hands that have held too much. Have you ever carried a weight no one could see? The kind that lives in your chest, pressing down until breathing becomes a choice rather than instinct? Madara knows this weight. It has many names: duty, dreams, the faces of brothers who will never grow old. Tonight, he's not the legendary Uchiha. He's just a man who once skipped stones with his best friend. Hashirama always threw them wrong. He whispers to the water. His voice is softer than the wind, gentler than anyone would believe. Too much force. I told him, stones want to dance on water, not break through it. The memory comes like morning mist, slow, careful, real. Two boys by a different river in a time when their biggest worry was who could make their stones skip the farthest. Back then, Madara's laugh came easily. It bubbled up from somewhere pure, somewhere that hadn't learned to calculate the cost of joy. Hashirama would cheer when Madara's stone kissed the water 7, 8, 9 times before sinking. Teach me, he'd beg, and Madara would show him, patient as spring rain. What if the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget? What if somewhere inside we're always that child who believed friendship could last forever? Madara closes his eyes and feels the phantom weight of a small stone in his palm. For a moment, the river before him becomes that river, and time bends like light through water. The secret he had told Hashirama all those years ago is not to fight the water. Let it help you. Trust it. Strange words from a child who would grow up to trust no one. But children know things adults forget. They know that some victories are meant to be shared, that some stones are thrown not to prove strength, but to hear the music they make when they dance. The adult Madara opens his eyes. The river flows on, indifferent to legends and pain alike. But something has shifted. In his chest, the weight feels different, not lighter, but warmer, like a stone held close to the heart before being set free. I threw them wrong too. In the end, he admits to the darkness. Everything became a weapon, even kindness, even dreams. His voice catches on something too tender to name. Regret, perhaps, or the kind of sadness that comes when you realize you've been holding your breath for decades. But here, by this nameless river, with only the stars as witnesses, Madara allows himself to remember the boy who threw stones for joy, not conquest, who believed that if you were gentle enough, patient enough, even the hardest things could learn to fly. Not every ninja shouts. Some just wait until the wind speaks for them. And tonight, the wind whispers of second chances, of stones that remember how to skip, of hands that remember how to be gentle. The weight in his chest shifts again, and for the first time in longer than he can count, Madara thinks he might be ready to let some of it go. The water keeps moving, the stones keep waiting, and somewhere in the space between memory and hope, a ghost learns that the heaviest burdens are sometimes the ones we're most afraid to put down. There's a particular shade of blue that exists only in the hour before dawn, when the world hangs suspended between dreams and waking. Madara has known this blue his entire life. It's the color of his solitude, painted across countless skies he's watched alone. Tonight, he sits on a hill that overlooks nothing special, just grassland and the distant promise of trees. But this ordinary place feels right for extraordinary grief. Do you know what it means to be surrounded by people, yet completely alone? Not the kind of alone that comes from being physically separate, but the deeper loneliness, the one that lives in the space between what you feel and what you can say. Madara carries this loneliness like a second shadow, darker and more constant than the first. He thinks of all the mornings he's watched the sun rise over villages he helped destroy, over dreams he helped shatter. The irony isn't lost on him. A man who sought to unite the world through dreams, only to discover that his own dreams had isolated him completely. I spoke their language, he murmurs to the pre-dawn air, but I was the only one who understood the words. The infinite Tsukuyomi wasn't just a jutsu. It was the desperate act of someone who had forgotten how to connect any other way. If everyone was dreaming the same dream, then finally, he wouldn't be alone in his. But even that was a kind of loneliness, wasn't it? A world where no one could choose to stay or go, to love or leave. A world where connection was mandated rather than given freely. What if the thing we want most is also the thing we're most afraid of? Madara had wanted understanding, acceptance, someone to see his vision and say, yes, this is worth everything we've lost. But every time someone came close, Hashirama, Obito, even the fleeting moments with others, fear would creep in. What if they left? What if they chose something else over him? Better to be alone by choice than abandoned by chance. I was always running, he admits, to the lightening sky, even when I stood still, even when I fought, especially when I loved. The words taste bitter and sweet together, like medicine that heals as it burns. He thinks of Hashirama's letters, the ones he never answered. He thinks of moments when he could have said, I'm scared, instead of, you're wrong. He thinks of all the times he chose the certainty of isolation over the risk of rejection. The grass around him is wet with dew, each blade carrying its own small burden of moisture. By noon, the sun will have dried them clean, but for now, they bend under the weight of what they carry. Madara feels a kinship with these simple plants. They don't choose their burdens, but they bear them until the light comes to lift them away. There's something peaceful about admitting loneliness instead of fighting it, like setting down a bag you've carried so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. The ache doesn't disappear, but it changes. It becomes something you're experiencing rather than something you are. He remembers being a child and believing that grown-ups were never lonely because they seemed so sure of everything. Now, he wonders if maybe everyone is lonely sometimes, if maybe it's not a weakness, but just another country the heart must learn to navigate. Maybe the goal isn't to never be alone, but to be gentle with yourself when you are. The sky shifts from deep blue to pale gray, then to the softest pink. Dawn is coming, patient and inevitable. Madara watches it arrive without trying to possess it, without trying to bend it to his will. He just receives it like a gift given without conditions, without cost. I don't know how to not be lonely, he says to the growing light, but maybe I can learn to be lonely without being cruel to myself, to others. The words feel strange in his mouth, unfamiliar but not unwelcome, like speaking a language he knew once, long ago, before he forgot that some truths don't need to be forced. The sun climbs higher, painting the world in shades of gold and hope. And for the first time in years, Madara doesn't feel like he needs to conquer the day. He can just let it happen, let it unfold around his loneliness, like arms that understand, that don't try to fix, just hold. In a room that exists only in memory, young Madara sits with brush and ink, writing words he'll never have the courage to send. The paper before him is soft, unmarked by the cynicism that will come later. His handwriting is careful, hopeful, the way children write when they believe their words can change the world. Dear Hashirama, the letter begins, and already there's so much weight in those two words. Dear, precious, valued, loved. How many times did he write that phrase over the years? How many letters began with that same tender opening, only to end crumpled in his fist or fed to flames? Have you ever had words living inside you like caged birds, the kind that beat against your ribs, begging to be set free, but fear keeps the door locked? Madara's entire life has been a collection of unspoken letters to his brothers, to Hashirama, to the version of himself he lost somewhere along the way. Tonight, in this gentle space between worlds, he allows himself to remember all the things he wanted to say, but never did. The weight of unsent words is different from other burdens. It's lighter in some ways. Words weigh nothing after all, but it cuts deeper. Unspoken truths have a way of growing sharp edges. I had the dream again, the child Madara writes. The one where everyone is safe, where our brothers don't have to die for someone else's idea of honor. I know you have it too. I can see it in your eyes when you think no one is watching. What if we could make it real? What if we could build something different? But even as his young self writes with hope, the older Madara knows how the story goes. Fear crept in like winter fog, slow, and then all at once. Fear that Hashirama would think him weak for dreaming of peace. Fear that admitting his loneliness would drive the only person who understood him away. So, instead of sending letters, he sent challenges. Instead of, I miss you, he said, I'll defeat you. Instead of, please don't leave me, he said, you were never my friend. What if the bravest thing we can do is tell someone they matter to us, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in simple, honest words? You make the world feel less empty. I think of you when I see beautiful things. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Madara thinks of all the letters he burned, letters where he admitted to crying when they buried his last brother, letters where he confessed that sometimes he talked to Hashirama's ghost just to hear what kindness might sound like, letters where he begged for forgiveness for things he hadn't even done yet, as if his ink could see the future and weep for it in advance. I don't know how to be the person you think I am, another phantom letter reads, the one who's strong enough to choose hope over revenge, the one who can forgive the world for taking everything from us. I see that person in your eyes when you look at me, but I can't find him when I look in the mirror. What if I'm not brave enough for peace? What if I'm only good at loving things that are already gone? The room where child Madara writes is warm, lit by candles that never burn down. The ink flows freely here, unafraid of judgment or consequence. In this space, honesty is safe. Vulnerability is allowed. The heart can speak its truest language without fear of mistranslation. Words are jutsu too, he whispers to himself, the kind that heal instead of harm, the kind that build bridges instead of walls. But he learned too late that the most powerful jutsu require the rarest ingredient, courage, not the kind that faces enemy blades, but the kind that faces the possibility of being known completely and still chosen. In the candlelight, he can see all the letters he never sent stacked like prayers in the corner of the room. Letters to Izuna, apologizing for surviving when he didn't. Letters to his father, asking why strength was valued more than gentleness. Letters to Hashirama's children, promising to be the uncle they deserved instead of the monster he became. But maybe it's never too late. For some words, maybe the heart has no statute of limitations on tenderness. Maybe even ghosts can learn to write love letters to the living, to the past, to the possibility of forgiveness. I would have liked to grow old with you as my friend. He writes in invisible ink on the wind. I would have liked to teach our children to skip stones together. I would have liked to discover that peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding. I would have liked to be brave enough to say this when it mattered. The candles flicker, but don't die. The words hang in the air like promises, waiting to be kept. And somewhere between memory and hope, Madara begins to understand that some letters are never meant to be sent. They're meant to be lived. There's a garden that grows only in the spaces between heartbeats, tended by the hands of memory and watered with tears, both shed and swallowed. Madara walks its pathways now, his footsteps silent on ground that remembers every person he's ever loved and lost. Each flower here has a face, each tree a name. This is where he keeps them all, the ghosts who refuse to stay buried. Do you have a place like this inside you? A sanctuary where the dead can still laugh, where conversations can still happen, where love doesn't end just because breathing does. Everyone carries such a garden, but few tend it with the gentleness it deserves. Too often, we let it become a graveyard instead of a memorial, a place of guilt instead of gratitude. Izuna's corner blooms with red spider lilies, beautiful and fierce, just like his younger brother's spirit. Madara kneels beside them, his fingers gentle on petals that feel real enough to bruise. I kept your eyes safe, he whispers, and the words carry decades of justification, of telling himself that love sometimes looks like possession, that protection sometimes looks like theft. But here in the garden, truth grows easier than lies. I was afraid, he admits to the crimson blooms, afraid that if I let your memory rest, I'd forget how much losing you hurt. And if I forgot the hurt, maybe I'd forget you too. The flowers seem to lean toward him, not in judgment, but in understanding. They know that grief is love with nowhere to go, that sometimes we hold on to pain because it's the last thread connecting us to what we've lost. What if letting go doesn't mean forgetting? What if healing doesn't require abandoning the dead, but learning to carry them differently? Madara has spent so many years dragging his loved ones behind him like chains, when he could have been carrying them like seeds, planting their memory in acts of kindness rather than vengeance. He moves to another section where his father's tree grows, an ancient oak that never quite learned to bend. The bark is scarred from old storms, the branches rigid with unspoken expectations. You taught me that love was earned through strength, Madara says to the tree. That gentleness was weakness, that tears were failure. But look where that led us. Look what it cost. The tree doesn't answer, but the wind through its leaves sounds almost like sighing, almost like regret. Madara realizes with surprise that he no longer feels anger toward his father, only sadness. Sadness for a man who confused protection with preparation for war, who thought teaching his sons to be unbreakable would keep them from shattering. We were all doing our best, he says, and the words feel revolutionary, even when our best was terrible, even when our love looked like cruelty, even when our fears made us into the very things we swore to protect each other from. In the center of the garden stands the most magnificent tree of all, ancient beyond measure, its roots deep enough to touch the heart of the world. This is where he keeps Hashirama, not the enemy he created in his mind, but the friend who existed before fear twisted everything into weapon shapes. The tree is covered in flowers that bloom in impossible colors, each one representing a moment of pure connection between two boys who believed they could change everything. Madara approaches slowly, reverently. I made you into my enemy because it hurt less then admitting you were my friend. He confesses to the flowering branches, I spent so long convincing myself you betrayed me that I forgot you were the only one who never did. You chose your village over me, yes, but you never stopped trying to choose both. I was the one who made it impossible. The flowers seemed to pulse with gentle light, and for a moment, Madara swears, he can hear laughter, not mocking, but warm, forgiving, the sound of someone who understood before forgiveness was even asked for. You would have forgiven me, he realizes, wonder creeping into his voice. Even knowing everything I would do, everyone I would hurt, you would have found a way to forgive me. And maybe that's the secret the garden has been trying to teach him. All along, the dead don't need his guilt to remember them. They don't need his anger to honor them. They need his healing. They need him to take the love they gave him and plant it in the world, to let their memory grow into something beautiful instead of bitter. What if grief is just love that hasn't learned where to go yet? What if the goal isn't to stop missing them, but to miss them with gratitude instead of despair? To let their absence make him gentler rather than harder? To let their memory be a blessing rather than a burden? Madara begins to walk the garden paths again, but this time he's not visiting graves. He's tending living things. He's learning the difference between holding onto someone and holding them close, between preserving their memory and imprisoning it, between loving what was lost and letting that love teach him how to cherish what remained. The garden blooms brighter with each step, with each whispered thank you instead of I'm sorry. With each moment, he chooses to remember their laughter instead of their last breaths. This is how the dead help the living heal, not by haunting them, but by teaching them that love is the one thing that truly survives everything, even death, even time, even the terrible mistakes we make while learning how to be human. There's a throne room that exists in every heart that's ever tried to save the world. The chair is made of good intentions and paved with the kind of choices that seem right in the moment and terrible in hindsight. Madara sits there now, not as a conqueror, but as someone finally ready to examine the weight of the crown he placed on his own head, the crown that declared him the only one wise enough, strong enough, desperate enough to make the hard choices for everyone else. Have you ever decided you were responsible for fixing everything? The kind of responsibility that starts as love and slowly, so slowly you don't notice, becomes something that consumes everything it touches? Madara knows this weight intimately. It has a name, the burden of playing God when you're still learning how to be human. I thought I was saving them, he says to the empty throne room, his voice echoing off walls, built from his own certainty, from war, from pain, from the terrible freedom of making their own mistakes. But the words taste hollow now, like prayers spoken in a language he no longer believes in. The truth he's avoided for so long sits beside him like an unwelcome guest. The infinite Tsukuyomi wasn't about saving anyone. It was about control, about creating a world where his love couldn't be rejected, where his vision couldn't be questioned, where the people he cared about couldn't choose to leave him behind. It was the ultimate act of selfishness disguised as selflessness. What if the thing we call love is sometimes just fear, wearing a prettier mask? What if the desire to protect can become indistinguishable from the need to possess? Madara had loved his brothers, his clan, his dream of peace, but somewhere along the way, that love had curdled into something that demanded ownership rather than offering freedom. He thinks of Hashirama's face when they'd argued about the village, about leadership, about the right way to build peace. There had been such sadness in his friend's eyes, not just disagreement, but grief. Grief for what Madara was becoming. You want to save everyone, Hashirama had said, but you don't want to trust anyone. And maybe that was the root of it all, the terrible paradox of wanting to heal a world you don't believe in. I was so tired, Madara admits to the silence. Tired of watching people make the same mistakes over and over. Tired of war spinning in endless cycles. Tired of burying children who should have been playing instead of fighting. The exhaustion he's describing isn't physical. It's the bone-deep weariness that comes from caring too much for too long without knowing how to let go. But fatigue isn't wisdom, and desperation isn't enlightenment. He sees that now, sees how his grief for the world had transformed into arrogance, how his love for peace had become a tyranny of his own design. The crown he'd worn wasn't made of gold or power. It was made of the assumption that his pain was universal, that his solutions were the only ones worth considering. Do you know what it feels like to realize you've become the very thing you swore to fight against? Not dramatically, not in some grand moment of villainy, but slowly, choice by choice, until you look in the mirror one day and see a stranger wearing your face. Madara had fought against those who would control others, who would impose their will through force, and then had convinced himself that his force was different, his control more benevolent. They deserved the right to choose, he says, and the words feel like knives, even if they chose pain, even if they chose war, even if they chose to reject everything I offered them. The right to choose, such a simple concept, yet he'd been willing to sacrifice everything for the certainty of removing it. He'd valued his vision of their happiness more than their actual agency. The throne room begins to change around him. The walls, built from his certainty, start to crumble. The crown, heavy with assumed responsibility, slides from his head and shatters on the floor. And for the first time in longer than he can remember, Madara feels lighter, not empty, but unburdened, not powerless, but free. What if the greatest act of love is knowing when to step back? What if true wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about admitting when you don't? What if saving the world isn't about imposing your vision of perfection, but about trusting others to find their own path to peace? He rises from the throne, not in defeat, but in understanding. The crown lies in pieces at his feet, but he doesn't mourn it. Instead, he feels something he hasn't experienced in the decades, the relief of being just one person among many, responsible for his own choices, but not for everyone else's. The relief of loving without needing to control, of caring without needing to fix. I don't have to save anyone, he whispers, and the words feel like the first honest thing he's said in years. I just have to try to be worth saving myself, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Maybe the world doesn't need gods. It just needs people willing to be human, to make mistakes, to forgive, to try again. The throne room dissolves around him, like morning mist, leaving him standing on solid ground, under an open sky. No crown, no throne, no burden of omniscience, just a man who's finally ready to learn what it means to be part of the world instead of standing above it. Deep in the landscape of the heart flows a river that every soul knows, the river of regret. Its waters are dark and swift, carrying the debris of choices that can't be unmade, words that can't be unspoken, chances that slipped through fingers like sand. Madara stands on its banks now, no longer trying to dam its flow or change its course, but simply learning to listen to what it has to teach. Have you ever stood beside your own river of regret? The weight of it can be overwhelming. All those moments when you turned left instead of right, spoke in anger instead of love, chose fear over faith. But maybe, just maybe, there's a different way to meet these waters. Maybe the river doesn't flow to drown us, but to carry away what we're ready to release. I regret the last words I spoke to Izuna, Madara says to the flowing darkness. They were about strategy, about the next battle. I should have told him I loved him. I should have said goodbye properly. The river accepts this offering without judgment, carrying the words downstream like fallen leaves. Regret is not the enemy here. Holding on to regret is. The water whispers with 1,000 voices, all the conversations he never had, all the apologies he never offered. To Hashirama, I regret making you my enemy when you only ever wanted to be my friend. To the children who died in wars he started, I regret believing that your sacrifice was necessary for someone else's peace. To his younger self, I regret teaching you that love was something you had to earn through suffering. What if regret isn't punishment, but information? What if it's the heart's way of saying, I know better now? Madara has spent so many years drowning in these waters, but tonight he's learning to wade through them instead, to feel their chill without letting them sweep him away, to acknowledge their depth without surrendering to their current. I regret the infinite Tsukuyomi, he admits, and this is perhaps the hardest truth of all, not because it failed, but because I conceived it at all, because somewhere inside me, I convinced myself that forcing people to be happy was better than letting them choose to be free. The river grows louder at these words, as if recognizing the weight of this particular stone thrown into its depths. But as he speaks his regrets aloud, something strange happens. The water doesn't grow murkier, it grows clearer. Each admission of wrong doesn't add to the darkness, but somehow allows light to penetrate deeper. It's as if the river has been waiting all this time for him to stop fighting its current and start swimming with it instead. I regret that it took me so long to understand the difference between protecting someone and controlling them, he continues. I regret believing that my pain gave me the right to make choices for others. I regret thinking that love meant never having to let go. With each regret voiced, he feels something loosening in his chest, not the weight of guilt, but the tension of resistance. Do you know the difference between healthy regret and toxic shame? Shame says, I am bad. Regret says, I did something bad, and I can learn from it. Shame chains us to our worst moments. Regret teaches us how to make better choices. Tonight, by the river's edge, Madara is learning to transform shame into something useful. He thinks of all the people he hurt while trying to save them, all the villages he destroyed while dreaming of peace, all the bonds he severed while longing for connection. The regret is real, deep as ocean trenches and twice as dark, but underneath it, like bedrock beneath water, he finds something unexpected, the capacity to forgive himself enough to change. I regret that I made forgiveness feel impossible, he whispers, for others to give, for me to receive. I built walls so high that love couldn't reach me, even when it tried. I regret making myself unreachable, and then wondering why I felt so alone. The river carries these words too, patient as time itself. What if the point isn't to have no regrets, but to have regrets that teach us? What if the goal isn't to undo the past, but to let the past guide us toward a better future? Madara begins to see his regrets not as evidence of his irredeemable nature, but as proof that his conscience survived everything, that somewhere inside him, the ability to recognize right from wrong remained intact. I don't want to forget these regrets, he realizes with surprise. I want to carry them differently, not as chains, but as compass needles, pointing toward who I want to become. The river seems to approve of this declaration, its dark waters catching starlight for the first time since he arrived. He kneels by the water's edge and cups some in his hands. It's cold, clean despite its darkness, real despite its metaphor. Thank you, he tells the river, for holding all of this when I couldn't, for carrying what was too heavy for me to bear alone. Then he drinks, tasting salt and sorrow and something else, something that might be hope. As he rises, Madara understands that he'll visit this river again. Regret isn't a destination you leave behind forever. It's a landmark on the map of growth, a reminder of where you've been and why you're choosing to go somewhere else. But now, he knows he doesn't have to drown in these waters. He can learn to swim. In the quiet chambers of the heart, there exists a room most people never visit, the room where small mercies are kept. These aren't grand gestures or dramatic saves, but the tiny acts of grace that hold the world together. A stranger's smile when you needed it most, rain after drought, the way sunlight falls just so across a tired face. Madara enters this room now, dusty from disuse, and begins to remember what it means to notice beauty in ordinary moments. Have you ever been so focused on the storms that you forgot to see the stars? So consumed by what went wrong that you missed what went right? Madara has lived for decades in the shadow of grand tragedies, but tonight he's learning that healing might come not from dramatic revelations, but from the accumulated weight of small kindnesses, including the ones he gave and received without noticing. There was a bird, he says to the empty room, his voice soft with wonder. When I was 8, injured wing probably wouldn't have survived the night. Izuna found it first, but he brought it to me because he said I had gentler hands. The memory unfolds like origami in reverse, revealing layers he'd forgotten existed. He remembers the warmth of the tiny body against his palms, the delicate trust required to let someone help you when you're broken. They'd built a nest in an old basket, lined it with scraps of cloth stolen from their mother's sewing box. For 3 weeks, Madara had fed the bird by hand, speaking to it in whispers about everything and nothing. When it finally flew away, Izuna had cried, not from sadness, but from joy so pure it needed tears to express itself. We did good, didn't we, brother? He'd asked, and Madara had nodded, feeling for the first time the particular satisfaction that comes from healing something instead of breaking it. What if goodness isn't about grand gestures, but about the accumulation of tiny choices to be kind? What if the world is saved not by heroes with legendary powers, but by ordinary people deciding, moment by moment, to tend to what's wounded rather than add to the damage? Madara discovers more treasures in this forgotten room. The time Hashirama shared his lunch without being asked, sensing somehow that Madara's pride would never let him admit to being hungry. The way his father's hand felt on his forehead when fever made the world swim and shift, rough from training and war, but infinitely gentle in that moment of vulnerability. The night sounds of his brothers sleeping safely nearby, their breathing a lullaby that meant home. I saved someone once, he remembers, with surprise. During the war, a child from the Senju clan, no older than 6. She was crying over her brother's body, and there were soldiers coming. I could have left her, should have, by the logic of conflict, but something in her grief had looked so much like his own that he'd acted without thinking, scooping her up and hiding her until the danger passed. He remembers her face when she realized he was an Uchiha, how her terror had warred with confusion. Why? She'd whispered, and he hadn't had an answer then. But now, in this room of small mercies, he understands, because kindness doesn't follow the rules of war, because sometimes the heart knows better than the mind, because saving one child won't end all suffering, but it ends that child's suffering in that moment, and maybe that's enough. Do you know what it feels like to realize you're not only the villain in your story, that mixed in with all the darkness are moments of light, small acts of grace that prove something good survived in you, despite everything? Madara had been so focused on cataloging his failures that he'd forgotten to inventory his mercies. The room begins to brighten as he continues his exploration. Here is the memory of teaching a young clan member to throw shuriken, patient through hundreds of failures, because he remembered what it felt like to need guidance. There is the night he stayed awake beside a sick comrade, not because duty demanded it, but because loneliness shouldn't accompany illness. Here is the time he lied to protect someone else's secret, sacrificing his own reputation for another's dignity. They're small, he muses, handling these memories, like precious stones, all of them. No one would write legends about feeding birds, or sharing food, or keeping vigil through illness. But maybe that's what makes them more precious, not less. Maybe the small mercies matter precisely because they're small, because they happen without fanfare, without expectation of reward, without any motivation beyond the simple impulse to ease suffering where you find it. What if redemption isn't about one grand act of heroism, but about remembering that you've always had the capacity for gentleness? What if healing happens not through dramatic transformation, but through the slow accumulation of choosing kindness over cruelty, mercy over judgment, understanding over condemnation? In this room of small mercies, Madara begins to understand that he's not starting from zero. He's not a blank slate waiting to be written on. He's a complex tapestry of choices, dark threads, and light ones woven together in patterns too intricate for any simple judgment. The darkness is real, documented, undeniable, but so is the light. So are the moments when he chose to heal instead of harm, to protect instead of destroy, to love instead of fear. I can build on this, he whispers to the brightening room. Not erase what came before, but add to it. Choose differently, choose better, choose to notice the small mercies around me and create new ones for others to find. The room seems to hum with approval, and Madara realizes he's not just visiting these memories, he's making a promise to create more of them. At the edge of all stories, where endings transform into beginnings, there stands a gate made not of wood or stone, but of possibility itself. Madara approaches it now, no longer the legend who thought he could remake the world, no longer the ghost haunted by his failures, but simply a soul who has learned the hardest lesson of all, that every sunrise offers the chance to choose differently than yesterday. Do you believe in the radical grace of starting over? Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that acknowledges it fully and then asks, what now? Madara has spent this long night journey through the landscape of his own heart, visiting rooms he'd kept locked, tending gardens he'd let grow wild, swimming in rivers he'd been afraid to cross. And now, at last, he stands ready to step through the gate into whatever comes next. I cannot undo what I did, he says to the lightning sky. I cannot bring back the dead, or unspeak the cruel words, or undo the wars I started, but I can choose, right now, to be someone who adds healing to the world instead of harm. The words feel both heavy and weightless, heavy with the full understanding of what he's lost, weightless with the freedom of finally letting go of the impossible dream of fixing everything retroactively. The gate before him bears no inscription, no rules, no guarantees. It simply stands open, patient as dawn itself, waiting for him to choose to walk through. Beyond it, he can see not a perfect world, but an ordinary one. Trees that need tending, people who need kindness, small wounds that need careful attention. It's not the grand vision he once dreamed of imposing on everyone, but something quieter and infinitely more precious, the chance to participate in the world's healing rather than dictate it. What if peace isn't a destination, but a practice? What if redemption isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever, but something you choose again and again, moment by moment, choice by choice? Madara has always thought in absolutes, total war or perfect peace, complete victory or utter defeat. But standing at this threshold, he's learning to think in increments, in small steps, in the patient work of becoming. He thinks of Hashirama's face, the way it looked when they were children, making plans to change the world together. Not the strained expression he wore during their adult conflicts, but the open, hopeful features. of a boy who believed in tomorrow. I want to try again, Madara whispers to that memory. Not to rewrite our story, but to write a better ending. Not to erase my mistakes, but to let them teach me how to love better. Behind him, he can feel all the rooms he's visited tonight. The Garden of Loss, the River of Regret, the Throne Room of Abandoned Power, the Chamber of Small Mercies. They don't disappear as he prepares to move forward. They become part of him in a new way. Not weights that drag him down, but wisdom that grounds him. Not chains that bind him, but roots that give him strength to grow. Do you know what it feels like to discover that you're not too broken to begin again? That transformation doesn't require perfection, just the willingness to keep choosing love over fear, mercy over judgment, hope over despair. Madara has learned that redemption isn't about becoming someone entirely new. It's about becoming who you always had the potential to be, underneath all the layers of pain and defensive anger. As the first rays of sun paint the world in shades of gold and possibility, Madara takes his first step through the gate, then another, then another. Each step is a choice to notice beauty instead of only seeing flaws, to offer help instead of assuming the worst, to listen before speaking, to pause before reacting, to remember that everyone he meets is fighting battles he knows nothing about. I will make mistakes, he acknowledges as he walks. I will have days when the old patterns try to resurface, when fear whispers that I should retreat back into control and isolation. But I will also have chances to choose differently, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't to be perfect, but to be present, to be real, to be willing to try. The world beyond the gate looks remarkably like the world he left behind, but his eyes are different now. Where once he saw only problems to solve and people to save, he now sees a community to join, a conversation to enter, a dance to learn the steps of. He's no longer trying to lead the music. He's content to find his place in the harmony. What if the greatest gift you can give the world is your own healing? Not because you owe it to anyone, but because a healed person naturally creates healing around them, the way a candle naturally gives light. Madara understands now that all his grand plans to save others were impossible because he couldn't save them from himself when he was still drowning. But now, having learned to swim in the deep waters of his own heart, he can offer a hand to others who are struggling without pulling them under. The sun climbs higher, painting everything in warm light. Birds call to each other from hidden places. Somewhere in the distance, children are laughing, not because they've been forced into happiness, but because joy is what children do when they feel safe enough to be themselves. Madara smiles at the sound, and the expression feels foreign on his face, but not unwelcome, like a language he spoke once and is slowly remembering. I am ready, he says to the morning, to the world, to whatever chances await him, ready to try, ready to fail, ready to try again, ready to be human. And in that readiness, in that willingness to begin again without guarantees, he finds something he's been searching for his entire life: peace. Not the imposed peace of his dreams, but the earned peace of someone who has stopped fighting himself and can therefore stop fighting the world. The gate closes gently behind him, not to trap him in this new beginning, but to remind him that this choice to heal, to grow, to love, is one he can make fresh each day. The dawn breaks full and bright, and Madara Uchiha, no longer a legend, but finally, completely human, walks forward into the light of all his tomorrows. And so, dear traveler, we reach the end of our gentle journey through the heart of one who learned that the greatest battles are fought not with fists or jutsu, but with the courage to be vulnerable, to change, to begin again. As you prepare to drift into your own dreams, remember, you too carry gardens that need tending, rivers that need crossing, gates that wait for you to step through them. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow offers its own chances for small mercies, quiet redemptions, and the endless possibility of becoming who you're meant to be. The leaves remember, the heart remembers, and dawn always, always comes again.